A king murdered on a toilet. Another stabbed to death at his own dinner party. One ruler who condemned his own brother to die alone at sea. These are not fictional stories or scenes from a fantasy series. This is the real history of England's earliest kings. No dragons, no myths, just a chain of shocking, chaotic events that rarely make it into school textbooks. It begins with King Athelstan, the first true king of all England, who united a divided land under one crown. But his reign was haunted. Athelstan sent his own brother to sea in a boat without oars, condemning him to a slow, lonely death. This act haunted Athelstan until his death. He never married and had no heirs, forever burdened by the brother he had sacrificed. His successor, Edmund, met an even more shocking end, stabbed to death at his own celebration by an uninvited guest. He was an outlaw, a man who had been banished from Edmund's lands after being convicted of serious crimes. By law, he should have been far away from the king's court. Walking into the king's feast was an act of astonishing boldness, or recklessness. But Leofa did not act like someone who feared the consequences. He simply walked in and began helping himself to the food and drink. At first, many people in the hall may not have recognized him, but Edmund did. The king immediately realized who the man was and became furious. Most rulers would have ordered their guards to handle the situation. Edmund chose a different approach. He stood up and decided to remove the intruder himself. Instead of calling his guards, the king chose to deal with it personally. Edmund rose and walked across the hall toward the uninvited guest. Edmund grabbed the man and attempted to drag him out, but Leofa was not defenseless. As the king tried to force him out, the outlaw pulled out a knife. In the chaos, the two men wrestled. Then Leofa struck. The blade went into the king several times. Within moments, the ruler of England collapsed. With Edmund gone, the crown passed to his brother, King Eadred. But the condition he lived with throughout his reign was disturbing in its own way. Eadred suffered from a severe digestive illness. The disease was so serious that he struggled to swallow food properly. Instead of swallowing normally, he would chew his food slowly, extracting the flavor. Once the juices were gone, he would spit the remains out. What happened next is truly strange. The king's attendants would then eat the food he had already chewed and spat out. Despite this, Eadred was an effective ruler. He managed to keep control during a time when Viking forces still threatened England. Eventually, his illness caught up with him. In 955, Eadred died. His reign was not marked by scandal, but his illness ensured his court remained one of the more unusual in English history. After Eadred's death, the crown passed to a new ruler, King Eadwig, whose reign would be remembered for scandal. Eadwig ruled from 955 to 959 and was known as Eadwig the Fair because of his striking appearance. Unlike the older kings before him, Eadwig was only about 15 years old when he took the throne. Many powerful nobles and church leaders expected to guide the young ruler, but Eadwig had his own priorities. The most famous moment of his reign happened on his coronation day. The ceremony itself went smoothly. After the rituals, the kingdom's most important leaders gathered for the traditional celebratory feast. These feasts were major political events where the new king would demonstrate his authority to his supporters. Everyone assembled in the hall, waiting for the young king to join them. But Eadwig was missing. Minutes passed, then more time went by. Murmurs began to spread as people wondered where the king had gone. Among those growing impatient was Dunstan, the powerful Archbishop of Canterbury, a man with no sense of humor. Eventually, he decided enough was enough. The Archbishop left the feast and went searching for the missing king. What he found when he located Eadwig would become one of the most talked about scandals of the entire era. Instead of attending his own feast, the teenage king had slipped away to a private chamber, and he was not alone. Inside the chamber with the monarch was a noblewoman named Elfgifu, and according to some sources, her mother as well. King Eadwig's reign began in scandal. During his coronation feast, he abandoned his leaders to spend time with a woman in private. Archbishop Dunstan was furious. He reportedly dragged the young king back to the hall in front of the entire court. The humiliation was severe. Eadwig exiled Dunstan, but the king died just years later, at only 19. The throne passed to his brother, Edgar. Though known as the Peaceful, his own story was filled with intrigue. Edgar sent a nobleman to report on the beautiful Elfthrith, but the messenger fell in love and lied to the king. He claimed she was ordinary and married her himself, but the king soon decided to visit the estate for himself. The deception was about to be unmasked, showing that even a peaceful reign could be built on ruthless secrets. But Elfthrith had her own feelings about the situation. She had been placed in a marriage built on deception. If the nobleman had not lied, she might have become queen instead. By the time the king's visit approached, she was angry and resentful. So, when Edgar arrived, she made a different choice. Instead of dressing plainly, she wore her finest clothes and jewelry. She presented herself exactly as she truly was, making sure the king could clearly see the beauty that had been hidden from him. Edgar immediately understood what had happened. The nobleman he had trusted had lied to him for personal gain. According to the chronicles, Edgar responded with cold patience. Rather than confronting Ethelwald immediately, he invited him to go hunting. Just the two of them. It sounded like a friendly outing between a king and one of his nobles, but it would be the last time he was seen alive. When the king invited his nobleman to go hunting, it may have sounded like a simple outing, perfectly normal in the life of a medieval court. Hunting was a common activity among kings and nobles, often used for private conversation away from the noise of the court. But in this case, the trip had a far darker purpose. Edgar and Ethelwald rode out alone. Ethelwald never returned. Most accounts agree Edgar killed him. Shortly afterward, Edgar married Æthelred himself, taking the woman he had been denied. Despite the dramatic beginning, Edgar's reign was stable. He ruled for 16 years and managed to maintain peace across the kingdom. But even during peaceful reigns, royal families rarely avoided conflict. When Edgar died in 975, the question of succession caused immediate tension. The main contenders were two boys, Edward from an earlier marriage and Æthelred, the son of Queen Æthelred. The nobles chose Edward. He was still a teenager when he became king. His reign was short and fragile, lasting only 3 years. Queen Æthelred never accepted Edward. She wanted her own son to rule. Political rivalries grew sharper, and tension built in the background. Then in 978, an event occurred that changed everything. Edward was out hunting near Corfe Castle, where his brother and mother lived. It should have been a simple, friendly visit. Edward approached the castle on horseback and was greeted by the household. As he raised the drink to his lips, something unexpected happened. Several servants suddenly attacked him. While the young king was drinking, they stabbed him repeatedly. The violence was sudden and brutal. Edward had no time to defend himself. His horse, startled by the attack and the smell of blood, panicked and bolted away. But Edward's foot had become caught in the stirrup. As the horse ran, the wounded king was dragged along the ground. By the time the animal finally stopped, Edward was already dead. The attackers quickly realized the seriousness of what they had done. A king had just been murdered. If the truth became widely known, the political consequences could be enormous. In a desperate attempt to hide the crime, the servants secretly buried Edward's body in a nearby marshy area. But the plan failed. Edward's body was eventually found, and the truth began to spread. His remains were later moved to a proper burial site. Stories of miracles began to circulate around his tomb. He was eventually recognized as a saint. He became known as Edward the Martyr. The name reflected how people remembered him, a young king killed by political ambition. With Edward dead, the throne finally passed to Queen Æthelred's son. His name was Æthelred. History remembers him by a nickname, Æthelred the Unready. The nickname did not mean he was unprepared. He was only 12 when he became king. The original Old English term was unread, which meant poorly advised or bad counsel. It was a clever wordplay. Æthelred meant noble counsel, so unread was essentially a joke. Unfortunately for England, the nickname turned out to be quite accurate. During Æthelred's reign, one decision would haunt the country: the St. Brice's Day Massacre. On November 13, 1002, Æthelred ordered the killing of Danish settlers throughout England. The king had received reports of a supposed Danish plot to overthrow him. But Æthelred's response was extreme. He ordered the slaughter of all Danes in the country. The violence was brutal. Entire communities were attacked. Churches were burned. Among those killed was Gunhilda, the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, king of Denmark. When news of her death reached him, the consequences for England would be enormous. After the killing of his sister Gunhilda, King Sweyn Forkbeard launched a massive and furious invasion of England. For years, Viking fleets ravaged the coast while King Æthelred tried to buy peace with the massive payments of the Danegeld. But the peace never lasted. In 1013, Sweyn's forces finally seized the throne, making him the first Danish king of England. His triumph was short-lived. Sweyn died just 5 weeks later, allegedly haunted by the ghost of Saint Edmund. Legend says the ghost struck him down as punishment. His death paved the way for Æthelred's return and the rise of a new hero. That hero was Edmund Ironside, who fought fiercely against Sweyn's son, Cnut, to reclaim the kingdom. Edmund's reign was short, but his bravery remains a powerful chapter in the chaotic history of medieval England. And the story of his death is one of the strangest and most disturbing tales in English royal history. According to several medieval accounts, Edmund was assassinated while using the toilet. The story claims that an assassin hid in the cesspit beneath the royal latrine. In medieval castles, toilets were often built above deep pits or shafts where waste would collect below. The killer supposedly waited in the darkness beneath the structure until the king came to use it. When Edmund sat down, completely unaware of the danger beneath him, the assassin struck. A sword or long dagger was thrust upward through the opening. The blade impaled the king from below, killing him in one of the most humiliating and shocking ways imaginable. The fierce warrior who had fought bravely against invading armies, who had earned the nickname Ironside through his strength in battle, died not on the battlefield, but in one of the most vulnerable moments of daily life. With Edmund dead, the struggle for England ended. Cnut took full control of the kingdom and became its new ruler. Cnut, often called Cnut the Great, reigned from 1016 to 1035. Many people know him from a famous story about the sea. According to that tale, Cnut placed his throne on a beach and ordered the tide not to come in. The waves ignored him, soaking his feet. But the point of the story is often misunderstood. Cnut was not trying to show his power. Instead, he was demonstrating that even a king could not command nature. His courtiers had been praising him as if he were almost godlike, and he wanted to show them that their flattery was ridiculous. Still, humility did not make him weak. When Cnut needed to be ruthless, he could be terrifyingly effective. One of his first problems Cnut faced as the new ruler of England involved a man named Eadric Striona. Eadric had spent years playing a dangerous political game, switching sides whenever it suited him best. His loyalty always seemed to follow whichever side appeared most likely to win. Ironically, Eadric had even helped Cnut rise to power. He believed that by supporting the Danish king, he would be rewarded with greater influence and status. But Cnut understood exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. A person who had betrayed multiple rulers could not be trusted. Instead of rewarding Eadric, Cnut decided to make an example of him. He had Eadric executed. Cnut ordered that Eadric's body be thrown over the walls of London so that animals and birds could feed on it. Being denied burial was considered one of the worst possible humiliations. Despite such brutal moments, Cnut's reign eventually brought stability. He ruled not only England, but also Denmark and Norway, creating a powerful northern empire. Trade improved, relationships with the church strengthened, and for a time England enjoyed a rare period of political order. But once again, the problem of succession would bring new chaos. When Cnut died in 1035, he left behind two sons from different marriages. Their names were Harold and Harthacnut. Instead of a smooth transfer of power, the kingdom quickly became divided between supporters of each son. Harthacnut was in Denmark at the time, managing affairs there, so Harold took control in England as regent. Over time, he strengthened his position and eventually ruled as king. He became known as Harold Harefoot, a nickname supposedly inspired by his incredible speed as a runner. However, his reign would become remembered for a particularly brutal political act. A young man named Alfred Ætheling returned to England in 1036. Alfred was the son of Æthelred the Unready, which gave him a legitimate claim to the throne. He had spent years in exile in Normandy, but may have hoped to visit his mother, or possibly even challenge Harold's rule. That decision turned out to be fatal. Harold's supporters captured Alfred and his companions. Many of Alfred's followers were executed or sold into slavery. As for Alfred himself, he was subjected to one of the cruelest punishments used in medieval politics. Ultimately, he was subjected to the horror of being blinded. Blinding was a common method of removing political rivals. By destroying a person's eyesight, they were considered physically unfit to rule, which removed them as a threat without technically executing them. But the process was horrifying. Red-hot metal rods or sharp blades were used to destroy the eyes. Alfred did not survive long after the punishment. He died soon afterward from his injuries. His death would not be forgotten by his younger brother Edward, who would later play an important role in England's future. Harold Harefoot himself did not reign for very long. He died in 1040, possibly from illness, and his death allowed his half-brother Harthacnut to finally take control of England. Harthacnut's reign began with an act of revenge that shocked many people. He was furious about the way Harold had ruled England while he was absent. To demonstrate his anger, he ordered Harold's body to be dug up from its grave. The corpse was then decapitated and thrown into a marsh. It was an act of revenge against someone who was already dead. Harthacnut's rule also became unpopular for another reason: taxes. He needed enormous amounts of money to pay his fleets and soldiers, so he imposed heavy taxes on the English population. When the people of Worcester refused to pay, he responded with extreme violence. He sent an army to burn the city and kill many of its inhabitants. The brutality of his actions quickly made him deeply unpopular. Yet his reign did not last long enough for the anger to grow into rebellion. In 1042, during a wedding feast, Harthacnut suddenly collapsed while drinking. He died at the celebration only about 24 years old. Because he had no children, the throne passed to his half-brother Edward, the same Edward whose brother Alfred had been blinded and killed years earlier. Edward would become known as Edward the Confessor. His reign, which lasted from 1042 to 1066, was far longer and more stable than many of the chaotic reigns that came before him. Edward was deeply religious and devoted much of his life to prayer and church building. His greatest architectural project was Westminster Abbey, which he spent years constructing. Unlike many previous kings, Edward was remembered more for his piety than for violence. But even his reign had its unusual mysteries. Edward married Edith of Wessex in 1045, yet the couple never had children. Some historical sources suggest that their marriage may have remained celibate throughout their lives. Certain historians believe Edward had taken a vow of chastity, choosing to live a life closer to that of a monk than a typical medieval king. Whether that was a religious choice or a political arrangement is still debated. What is certain is that Edward left no clear heir. As he grew older, different nobles and foreign rulers began claiming that Edward had promised them the English throne. Some believed William, Duke of Normandy, had been chosen as successor. Others supported Harold Godwinson, the most powerful nobleman in England. When Edward died on January 5, 1066, the conflict over succession exploded almost immediately. Harold Godwinson was crowned king the very next day, but his claim was challenged by two powerful rivals. Harold Hardrada of Norway invaded from the north, while William of Normandy prepared to cross the English Channel. Harold first marched north, securing a stunning victory over the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But news soon arrived. William of Normandy had landed in the south. Harold's army had to march back instantly. In October, the two forces met at Hastings. Harold's soldiers formed a powerful shield wall, resisting hours of attacks. Then the line broke. Harold was killed in the chaos, ending Anglo-Saxon rule and beginning the Norman era. William of Normandy became the conqueror, forever changing England's culture, language, and future. The age of England's earliest kings had come to a violent, definitive end.